Okay, so now that we're done talking about sharks, we can fill sharks in on our little table that we started making yesterday, right? So remember this table that we filled out with Anatha so far? We're going to add to it. We just added Chondrichthyes to our, list of classes. So let's put that one in. Okay, easiest one. Jaws? Yes. I mean, literally, there's a movie called Jaws. It's about Chondrichthyes, right? Okay, breathing structures? Gills. Okay, they use gills to breathe. And how many do they have? 5. Good. Okay, their skeleton. Okay, do they just have a skull now? No. Okay, let's just say they have a full skeleton. And what is it made out of? Cartilage. That's what Chondrichthyes means. Okay, so good. We are this far along. We have added that to our list. We're going to tack on a few more today. Hopefully we can cover all the up to 5 classes. Okay. All right, so next up on our list, okay, we're done talking about cartilaginous fish. Now it is finally time to talk about regular fish, okay? Actual fish. These are actual fish, true fish, whereas the fish that we talked about before were either jawless or made of cartilage, right? So these are true fish, right? Let's look at what separates these apart from sharks, right? What is the difference between these two? Well, for one is the gills. Okay, this is one of the biggest differences. Sharks have exposed gill slits that, in general is not really a good idea. It makes it very vulnerable. Like one of the recommendations if you're in a shark attack is to grab its gills. Okay, well, here's a fish. A fish has a gill cover called an operculum covering their gills, right? What does that do? It offers protection so you can't just grab the gills. In fact, that was the reason why I couldn't get that lingcod the other day, because I couldn't get beneath the gill cover. That was the problem, all right? And what can the gill cover do? You can move the gill cover back and forth. What does that allow the fish to do? Breathe, exactly, because moving the gill cover back and forth flushes water over your gills, fresh water, so it gets to breathe. Well, a shark does not have that luxury of flushing the water over its gills, so how does it manage to flush water over its gills? By continuing to swim forward, right? So a shark can't stop swimming unless it has learned to gulp water and push it past its gills. Very few sharks can do that. Most sharks just swim for their whole lives. And fish, they can stop and sleep, right? That makes them more efficient. They can stop and sleep because when they stop, they just use their gill covers to do this, and they can breathe, right? So it saves energy, right? Allows them to sleep and all. Sharks have to always be constantly swimming. So imagine this. You guys have somewhat of a gill cover yourself, right? It's called the diaphragm. Your diaphragm opens and closes your lungs so that you can take in air in and out, right? If you did not have a diaphragm, then what would you have to do? You would have to drive in your car, stick your head out of the window, and open your mouth, hoping the air will flush in itself. Does that make sense? That's what a shark is doing, right? By moving forward, it is hoping the water goes past its gills. Okay? So, gill cover, that is the first difference, right? Second difference, fish have a swim bladder, right? Now, what is the swim bladder? It's an organ that is filled with air, all right? It might sound silly that a fish needs like a float tube to be able to swim, but if you think about it, a fish is just a body of muscle and bone, both of which are heavier than water. So if it did not have a swim bladder, a fish would just sink like anything else made of muscle and bone, right? So it has a swim bladder, an air sac that allows it to, control its buoyancy and swim around easily, like a submarine. Okay? Now in contrast, a shark does not have a swim bladder and instead relies on its primitive but huge oily liver, right? It's got a big liver that has some oil in it, and oil is lighter than water, so it helps with its buoyancy. But as we're going to learn when we talk about the epipelagic ecosystem, its swimming style and shape of its fins also help with its buoyancy. Okay, but as for now, we're going to talk about the main difference: swim bladders in fish and oily liver in sharks. Okay, that's the second difference. Now the third and most important difference between regular fish and sharks is their skeleton. Regular fish have a skeleton that is made out of actual bone. this is the first time in vertebrata that we have actual bone now, right? Look, a full, complete skeleton that is made out of bone, right? Whereas, look over here, the shark skeleton is made out of what again? Cartilage, right? Okay, so there you go. Fish have skeletons made out of actual bone, and that's why we call it bony fish, right? So have you guys heard this term before? Bony fish? That is what it's referring to. Class Osteichthyes. Oste means bone, right? Like osteoblast or osteoporosis, right? Okay, so like oste means bone, ichthyes means fish, the bony fish, right? So these guys have actual bone. That's what separates them from sharks. Okay, so, you know, like, to be honest, I'm not actually that interested in regular fish, right? They're okay. They're always slimy and stuff. They're fun to catch, and they taste pretty good. But other than that, I'm not very, you know, intellectually invested in fish. So we're not going to cover too much about fish, but we will talk about its uses in our culture, right? Like this, sushi. Okay, this, in my opinion, is the big three, right? The three main sport fish that people try to catch and eat raw, right? So hamachi, salmon, and ahi, right? Those come from these three fish right here. Yellowtail, Atlantic salmon, and usually big-eye tuna, right? You take these three fish, you put them all together, you know what you get? A rainbow roll, right? Has all three of the fish inside, and then some of the imitation crab. But then, yeah, here's some other types of sushi. I just want to show you guys real quick what type of fish they come from. Tobiko, what is that? Those are eggs, right? And come from the flying fish. And saba is mackerel. So yeah, fish eggs, those are pretty cool, right? Flying fish, has anybody seen a flying fish before? You have? Mm-hmm. Yeah? Have you guys watched them fly? Man, it is crazy, man. The flying fish, they like leap out of the water and they just like fly. It's crazy. I watched this one being chased by a sea lion, and most of them fly like about a foot off the water, but this one went like 6 or 7 feet, and like it just kept going up, and I was like, oh, that one's gone. Like, it just like kept going up, and I was like, whoa, that is crazy. It went like so far too. Right. Okay, I actually want to show you a quick video of a flying fish. I forgot to include it in the lecture slide. What was it called? It was called chestnuts. Calories. Okay, so here's the video that I made way back when I went to Catalina. Alright, watch this. Look at this. Okay, check this out. See that? Oh, what just happened? Okay, there's a sea lion there that has learned to chase flying fish into the dock. And then it crashes and it catches it afterwards, right? So it's pretty crazy.
Can you slow-mo that?
And then one of them flew so high, it landed on top of the dock. Which you see. Yeah. Okay, so that's a flying fish. So yeah, they're pretty cool, right? Okay, moving on. So back to the topic of regular fish, right? Let's compare the fins of a shark versus that of a bony fish, right? You guys know, like, the fins of a shark is just one big plank, right? It's just one solid piece. Whereas the fins of a fish have these spines through them, right? They're like rays of bones, okay, coming out in all directions. Okay, so in that sense, we like to call these fish ray-finned fish because their fins have these rays of bones going through them, right? Whereas the sharks, they don't, right? It's just one solid chunk. Okay, so ray-finned fish. Turns out, most fish nowadays are ray-finned fish, but back in the day, there was another type of fish that was more popular, right? The other type of fish is called lobe-finned fish, all right? So we have two types of fish with two types of fins. These are both osteichthyes, but they have different types of fins, right? So we have ray-finned fish. Their fins have these bony rays through them, and we have these lobe-finned fish, in which their fins, you guys look down here, kind of looking like paddles, right? Okay, so look at these. They have this like fleshy protrusion of muscle, and then a fin at the end of it, right? It's, you know, pretty different from a normal fin. It's just rays of bones that come off of the body, right? This one actually has a little stub connected to it, and then the fin, right? So we have ray-finned fish and lobe-finned fish. We used to, this came out first and used to be more common, right? But nowadays, it's mostly this one, right? Anybody know what this is called, by the way? Anybody seen this before? It's a strange fish indeed. There's only 2 living species still around, right? It's called a coelacanth, right? Coelacanth. People like to call it coelacanth, but it's actually coelacanth, right? So coelacanth, a pretty primitive fish that still has its lobe fins, right? A fleshy protrusion at the end. Now here's the thing, that fleshy protrusion of the fin acts differently from a normal ray fin. A normal ray fin stays in place, but a fleshy protrusion like this can waddle around, right? It can move it a little bit, kind of like a paddle, right? So you guys gotta try to kind of imagine what it can do with these kind of fins, maybe if they were longer, right? So just keep that in your mind, right? Okay, so lobe-finned fish, right? Muscular potential, which means it can use them like this, right? See what they're maybe approximating in later evolution. Okay, so I'm gonna skip a few slides. Okay, so there's not that many, like I said, there's not that many lobe-finned fish left. There's only 8 species, right? 2 species of coelacanth and 6 species of lungfish. These have the lobe fins, right? So here's the thing. Maybe you guys had enough time to think about it. What do you think these lobe fins are kind of approximating here? I can move around. Legs, exactly, right? They're like muscular, they don't act like normal fins, they can waddle around. They're approximating legs. Look what organ this fish has that no other fish has. Lungs. Where do you think we're headed here? Terrestrial, right? We're coming onto land. So back in the day, when fish started to come onto land, the lobe-finned fish, right? They look like they might have a little advantage, right? If we were to compare these 2 types of fish, a lobe-finned fish versus a normal ray-finned fish, right? If ever the ocean experienced low nutrient levels and less food, maybe fish would look for an alternative place to look for food. How about near the shore? How about places that require you to go onto land for just a few minutes, right? Which of these do you think will be able to do that? Probably the lobe-finned fish, right? So the lobe-finned fish coming onto land for a few, minutes at a time, okay? Then maybe if they learned how to hold their breath for longer, they would come on for a few hours at a time, right? So we get early fish like this, Eusthenopteron. It's not important that you know the name of it, but just know that it was a lobe-finned fish, and it started looking for food near the shores, okay? Now imagine this. There's not that much food in the water, so they started moving towards the shore, and whoever could hold their breath the longest could go the furthest, and they would have the most food, all right? So once they ate all the food on shore, then they would have to go further, but you can only go further from the water if you can hold your breath longer. So they just got better and better at living onto land until one day we get these organisms that can come onto land. Early amphibians like Ichthyostega and Tiktaalik, right? Early amphibians like this could come onto land for longer periods of time because there's more food out there, and then they were able to access that. The ones that stayed in the water may not have been able to get that food, right? So then there's like this movement onto land you see in terms of evolution. And then the 2 most important adaptations that we saw, the coelacanth with its limbs, the lungfish with its lungs, those are the 2 major things that are going to come into play as we move on in this discussion, right? Okay, and then we get to our present day amphibians, right up here. That's amphibia. Okay, so from here, let's take a break from this and let's add in the last class that we just talked about, right? The last class that we just talked about is called Osteoichthyes. Oops. Osteoichthyes. Okay, Do osteichthyes have jaws? Yes. Okay, all fish have jaws. What do they use as their breathing structure? Gills, but what improvement have they made? Well, the lungfish has lungs, but what improvement over sharks have they made?
Gill cover.
The gill cover, yeah. With gill cover, okay? And then what type of skeleton they have? They have a full skeleton, but it is made out of bone. Okay, so you can see how it is improving as we go along. Okay, so at this point, we're talking about how osteichthyes is making its trek onto land, right? Osteichthyes, there's two types, lobe-finned and ray-finned, and one of them is more adapted to the ocean, and the other one looks like is able to crawl onto land, right? So the lobe-finned fish, with its limbs and lungs, its proto-limbs and proto-lungs, right? It's starting to come ashore, evolving later into primitive amphibians, and then now into our modern day amphibians. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the fourth class of vertebrata, Amphibia, right? Class Amphibia. See, at this point, the class names become a lot easier, right? Because those words are a lot more familiar in our everyday usage. So class Amphibia is right here. You see that we just finished talking about these three, these fish, right? These are marine organisms, right? They're basically purely marine. And we're moving on to this section in which we see these, which are basically terrestrial, right? And so amphibians, right in the middle, is like the halfway point. Half water, half land, right? In fact, that's literally what amphibian means, right? So before we can talk about amphibians, we have to talk about the fact that every time we go to a new class, each new class retains features from the previous class, and it also adds on features of its own. So at this point, I'm going to introduce a new feature. Their blood, right? Whether it's cold or warm blood. So we'll add blood right over here. Okay? And it turns out all fish are cold-blooded, and these frogs, or amphibians, are cold-blooded because they have retained that feature from their past lives as a fish, right? Back when they used to be a fish, they were cold-blooded, and now they are still cold-blooded. The only reason why we haven't talked about this yet is that when you live in the ocean, cold-bloodedness is irrelevant. Everything living in the ocean is cold-blooded. It only becomes relevant when you live on land, because it is possible to be warm on land. In the ocean, it's basically not possible to be warm, right? We'll explain more of that later. Okay, so we can fill all these out with cold, 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 and when we tack on amphibia, we're gonna write cold over here for their blood. Okay. Now here's the thing: cold blood, right? Cold blood versus warm blood. The difference is warm blood organisms, they can regulate their body temperature and make themselves warm. Cold-blooded organisms, they cannot regulate their body temperature, and they will be warm when the environment is warm. They will be cold when the environment is cold. So if you live in the ocean and the ocean is cold, then you're just going to be cold, right? If you're warm-blooded, then what's going to happen every time you get cold? You're going to, what are you going to do? You're going to try to warm yourself back up. Well, guess what? You warm yourself back up, the ocean makes you cold immediately. What do you got to do? Waste more energy, make yourself warm. As soon as you become warm, the ocean cools you down immediately. The ocean is too cold for you to remain warm. So that's just a waste of energy, right? There's no point. If you want to live in the ocean efficiently, you should be cold-blooded. There are very few warm-blooded organisms in the ocean. Out of the millions and millions of animals that live in the ocean, only about 100 or so are warm-blooded. Clearly, it's the unpopular choice, right? You should be warm, cold-blooded if you live in the ocean, all right? So that's why we didn't talk about it now. But now that we're coming onto land and the air is not as like warmth-sucking as the ocean is, then it is possible to be comfortable and warm-blooded on land, all right? In the ocean, you should just be cold-blooded, right? But on land, now that we're moving on to land, it becomes relevant. So we will bring cold and warm-bloodedness into our discussion from now on. Okay, the scientific word for cold blood is ectothermy, right? For warm blood, it's called endothermy, but those are not super important terms to know. Okay, so let's talk about amphibians, right? What does amphibian mean? Amphi means two, right? So, like amphipathic, that was a bad one. How like ambidextrous, something like that, right? It means two. So two what's two places I can live? Land or ocean, right? Or not ocean, land or water. Okay, so if you have something that's amphibious, like an amphibious car, it can drive on land, but it can also go into the ocean, right? Like a boat. So amphibian, right? Organisms that live in two places, water and land. It's like the halfway. If you want to be able to live in the water and the land, then you need adaptations to live in the water and adaptations to live on the land. So for example, the adult frog, or in this case that's called a cane toad, has these adaptations, webbed digits, fingers, right, to be able to swim. And to be on land, it has limbs and lungs. See, at this point, we're going to realize that limbs and lungs are the two most important things you need to live on land, right? Lungs is the best way to breathe on land, and limbs is the best way to move around on land. Okay, so limbs and lungs, look for those in all the following next few classes that we talk about. Okay, so let's add to our little list up here. Right? Amphibians. Do they have jaws? Yes, everything from now on has jaws, so that one's the default, right? Yes. Their breathing structure. Well, it turns out that they have lungs now. Okay, so we'll put lungs, but I'm going to put a half in front of it. Okay, put a half. We'll talk about why later. Okay, their skeleton, everything from now on has a full skeleton that's made out of bone. Okay, so that one's easy. And we can tack on another attribute. Their movement style, okay? Their appendages. Okay, so I'm going to put movement down here. And for all these fish, we're going to put fins, right? Okay, fins, fins. For this, you could put ray and lobe fins. And over here, we're going to put half limb. Okay, and we'll explain why half later. Okay, so half limbs, half lungs. Why do we say that? Clearly this frog has limbs and it has lungs, enabling it to live on land. However, has the frog always been like this? No. Where can we look back to determine whether the frog has always had limbs and lungs? We look at its larval stage, right? You cannot escape the larva, right? Let's look at its life cycle. Wow, this is probably the most familiar life cycle we are covering in this class, right? Frog eggs laid in the water, then they hatch into tadpoles. These are actual tadpoles. This is not a tadpole larva of a tunicate. This is an actual tadpole, all right? So make the distinction. Actual tadpoles, right? They are fully aquatic. And what do I mean by that? How do they breathe? They use gills. How do they move around? They use fins. So it turns out half of the frog's life cycle is using half lungs, half gills. You guys see what's going on here? And it's using half limbs when it's an adult, but when it's a larva, it is using the other half of the time fins. Okay, so we're not fully terrestrial yet. We're only semi-terrestrial. Okay, and so eventually, as the frog matures, it undergoes the change, right? The change is called metamorphosis. Remember that? It's basically larval settlement. And then after that, it turns into an adult frog, which is terrestrial now, right? Semi-terrestrial. Now here's the thing. Even though the frog has adaptations to be terrestrial, limbs and lungs, it does not have all the necessary adaptations, right? So let's see what it's missing. When the frog has to reproduce, okay? It has to lay its eggs in the water. Have you guys seen frog eggs before? Right? If you have not, then they're like boba. Okay, that's the best way to describe it. They don't have, you know, a protective covering. It's gelatinous. If you were to lay these eggs on land, what would happen to them? They would dry out. Exactly. Okay, so their eggs, right, must be laid in the water. That is something holding them back. Okay? We will add that to our list later. You'll see why. Okay? So that's one thing holding them back. A frog cannot live too far from the water because it needs to reproduce in the water. So don't get too far. You should stay close enough that when you reproduce, you're at least at a accessible location, right? Okay, so laying your eggs in the water. Second, the adult frog itself has very thin skin that is so thin it can absorb chemicals and water from the environment, right? Well, this thin skin is not good for living on land. What will happen if the frog is always on land? It will dry out, same as before. The thin skin will dry out, and it has to always live near water or in a very moist environment. So for example, salamanders, another amphibian, are always found under damp logs, right? Or frogs always living in the water, the salamanders, newts, and axolotl that always live in the water, right? They have very thin skin, so they can come out of the water for short periods of time, but they cannot stay on land. They are not fully terrestrial. Okay, so that's the problem with amphibians, right? Amphibians have to always stay in the water or near the water. So how can we fix that? The next class of vertebrates has evolved to fix both these problems and become fully terrestrial. Enter, right, reptiles, okay? Reptiles now are complete with scales. And what's so good about scales? They can hold in water and prevent water loss, right? So let's talk about reptiles. Class Reptilia. Oh, easy, right? Okay, class Reptilia is the next one on our list, right? Add it over here. Okay, so retaining old features from before, cold-blooded, use of lungs, but here's the thing, reptiles have lungs ever since they were born, so they always have lungs now. So let's put those in. Yes to jaws, lungs all the time, full skeleton made of bone, and cold-blooded, right? Cold-blooded. All right, I guess I can add in the last one. It always has lungs now too.
Is that why when you buy like an iguana, they need to get like a lamp too?
Sort of. It has to do with that. They make you get the lamp. Like, it doesn't need the lamp, but if you want it to be comfortable and digest its food quickly, then yeah. Like, it's not like it can't survive without it. It's just that its metabolism will be slow and it'll be not very comfortable, right? It's just more comfortable when it's warmer. Okay, so I'll go on to marine iguana. That is a marine example of a reptile, right? But this reptile, as we're going to find out later, is actually more terrestrial than it is aquatic. Okay, that's the thing about reptiles. Reptiles are so terrestrial that they cannot live in the ocean very well, and the ones that do live in the ocean very well have some big problems associated with them. We'll see what they are in a second. Okay, so cold-blooded, have lungs and limbs. Okay, good. And they have scales to prevent water loss. Okay, so at this point, let's add on body covering. All right. Okay, their body covering. Okay, so body covering. These ones is not super important. These ones. But it becomes important right over here with amphibians. So amphibians over here have thin skin, and we want to see the fact that it improves in reptiles with scales. Okay, scales that prevent water loss. Okay, so you see, we have fixed the thin skin problem. Can the reptiles stay on land forever? Can they? Yes, they can. In fact, they are so good at retaining water that they can live in deserts better than any other animal, right? So they have scales now. Great. They can live on land forever. Now, what other problem do we have to fix? What other problem did frogs have? What was that? No? We didn't talk about mating yet.
Cold blood.
So they still have cold blood though, so they didn't fix that problem. See what I'm saying? What problem did frogs have that made them not fully terrestrial? One of them was thin skin. What was the second one? They had to lay their eggs in water. Exactly. Okay, so laying their eggs in water, that was a problem. Well, reptiles, they have fixed this problem. Their eggs look like this. They have evolved a calcareous eggshell. All right? An eggshell, right? You probably never thought that it was important, but it is. Because this thing holds in water and it allows the egg to develop on land without fear of drying out. Okay. Now here, the eggshell is not for protection because they're very brittle, they're very weak, okay? So it doesn't offer much, mechanical protection, but it does offer protection against the elements, right? So like wind, rain, and fires, and, no, not fire, sorry, sun, right? Wind, rain, and sun, it doesn't have to worry about those things, and it can live on land and develop, okay? So it has eggs now. So at this point, let's add in their eggs. Okay, eggs, or no, let's put not eggs. Sorry, we'll put reproduction. Okay, so for these ones, let's just all combine them into a general term. It's not a scientific word that we're gonna call water eggs. Okay, eggs that can be laid in the water. Water eggs. All right, water eggs. Water eggs. Water eggs, all the way until here. Now we have land eggs. And if you want, you can put, because they have the calcareous shell. Okay, so the eggshell is important because it holds in water and it prevents the eggs from drying out, and so now they can be laid on land. Cool, right? Okay, so reptiles are very good at living on land. They are fully terrestrial. But here's the problem, okay? We're not here to talk about terrestrial biology. We're here to talk about marine biology, okay? So how do you take these terrestrial adaptations and move them into the ocean, which sounds like a bad idea, and it is, right? So let's look at some marine reptiles, right? Fully marine reptiles. There are only a few. Sea turtles, sea snakes, right? These are fully marine reptiles. And right off the bat, you can see that they have clear physical adaptations to living in the ocean. Look at their limbs have been adapted into a paddle shape so that they're good at swimming, right? The limbs of reptiles that live on land are good for walking. These ones good for swimming, right? Okay, so
what about the marine iguanas?
The marine iguana, what about it?
Like, isn't it considered like a marine animal too?
Yeah, but it's not fully marine, right? It's actually more terrestrial than marine. It spends most of its time on land, actually. It goes in the water to eat, but it comes back on land because it's just more comfortable for it. Right? These things are fully marine, as in they spend 95% of the time in the water. Sometimes they'll come onto land, but most of the time they're in the ocean. Right? Okay, so yes, they have physical adaptations to be able to swim, but they have also these adaptations that make it live on land. All right, so right off the bat, which one of these land adaptations do you think is going to be detrimental for living in the ocean? Lungs, exactly. Because what is the best way to breathe when you're in the water? Gills. And if you're in the water, why would you have lungs? Why would you even try to breathe air? That's just foolish, right? You should breathe water. It's all around you, right? So let's talk about lungs. What is the problem with lungs and breathing air? Well, look what this turtle is doing. What is it doing? It's breathing air. It has to lift its head above the water, and it has to be at the surface. What could be lurking below that you can't even see at this point? Right? There would be predators, right? There's a lot of sharks, like the tiger shark. They like to eat sea turtles, right? Because they always have to come up to breathe, and when they come up, they lift their head out of the water, and they can't even see below them. So the shark comes and attacks. Okay. Besides its vulnerability, the fact that you always have to come up for air means that you limit your dive time and your max depth, right? You're not able to reach all the way down because you're gonna have to come up anyway. At some point, you can't stay down forever. You'll have to come up. So you limit your dive time and your max depth, right? Your hunting intervals are shorter than that of like a normal fish. A normal fish can hunt for 24/7, basically, right? But a sea turtle always has to come up for air eventually. Okay? And the last one is, when you breathe air, all the air goes into your lungs. What's a lung? A lung is a sack full of air. Does that sink well? No. But this turtle wants to dive to the bottom. So how are you going to dive to the bottom when you're carrying 2 sacks of air? That's just, you shouldn't be doing that, right? Like, if anything, you shouldn't even be carrying air at all. You should just go down, right? That would be easier. But no, it has to breathe. See, breathing air is just such a big problem in the ocean. So you are extra buoyant and you have to expend extra energy to make it down to the depth. The fish, they can just control their swim bladder and go down easily, right? But the sea turtle or other, lung-bearing organisms in the ocean, what do they have to do to counterbalance that weight? Or sorry, not that weight, that buoyant force, right? Well, they have to tack on extra weight, right? And the way they do that is by eating rocks, right? Okay, so over here is a prehistoric reptile that, because it had lungfuls of air, they would eat rocks that are called gastroliths, right? Gastro for stomach, lith means rock. And those things offer like a counterweight to allow it to sink. Okay? Without these things, its lungs would just float it up to the surface and it'd be too hard for it to sink. Yeah, Joe, right?
And what after time they would just merge together to create one big rock? Like they would fuse together?
Oh, you mean the rocks, would the rocks fuse together?
Yeah, like inside its stomach?
No,
Or
no,
is
they
it-
would not.
Oh.
No, they just pass the rocks like you pass the kidney stones, right?
Okay.
So they have to keep eating them. All right. Rocks can only fuse together if you like combine them with like crazy pressure, like tons and tons of pressure. Nothing that any animal can do. All right. Okay. So eating rocks, right? Humans, we have invented a similar technology to this, right? We wear wetsuits when we go in the water. We're extra buoyant. How do we get down to depth? Yes, lead, right? Weight belt. This is a human equivalent to this same issue that we have. If we're trying to dive, you should try to dive with a wetsuit and no weights. It's impossible, right? You'll float right back up. Okay, so like a weight belt. Okay, what else is bad about a reptile? Besides breathing air, is the fact that its amazing land eggs, right? Its amazing land eggs turns out to be a big problem in the ocean, all right? See, these land eggs, they're so proud of them because they don't have to lay them in the water now. But here's the thing, now they have to lay them on land because this egg, look at, it's round, right? Well, imagine this egg in the ocean. The water doesn't stay put, it moves. So you slosh the egg back and forth, hitting a couple rocks over here, hit those rocks over there, what's gonna happen to it? Break open, right? These eggs are no good for being laid in the ocean, right? They're good for land because the wind is not strong enough to blow this basket over, right? The eggs can be in a pile safely because air is easy to hold these in, right? But you cannot put these eggs in the water. They'll just move around and crash into everything, right? The right way to lay eggs in the water is like this, okay? This is the right way. This is the horn shark egg case I showed you, and this is the mermaid's purse, the skate egg case. Okay, what do they have? They have these little tendrils, right? Or the corkscrew shape, which allows them to be wedged into rocks and hold their position, right? You look at like a oval ellipsoid shell, and this thing can't grab onto anything and just rolls around. Whereas this thing grabs onto the rock and stays there. Okay, so it stays in one place, and even though the waves are sloshing back and forth, it will usually stay in place. Sometimes it gets washed on the shore and they die, but usually it'll stay in place. Okay. Second, they are leathery and tough. They are not fragile and brittle and hard. Okay, being hard makes you brittle. So instead they're leathery, so when they do crash into a rock, nothing happens. Okay, they're okay. So this is the proper way to lay eggs in the ocean. Unfortunately, reptiles with their land eggs are forced to lay them onto land. Okay, so what does the turtle do? It climbs up onto land. Does this look easy? Now that their limbs have turned into paddles, no, it is not. And they're very heavy. They are no longer supported by the buoyant force of the water. So this is hard. They have to come onto land, expend all this energy, and they come lay their eggs. All right, so once this mother sea turtle is done laying their eggs, what does it do? What was that? No. What does the mother do? She leaves, right? It'll take weeks for these things to hatch. Oh, well, look at that. The mother just abandons all her eggs on the shore. right? Look, this is just on the beach. You can go to the beach and dig them up, right? Any lizard or raccoon will go and dig them all up and eat them all, right? Easy, free food right here, okay? The mother does not watch over her nest, and that is in general a very bad reproductive strategy, right? You should always protect your nest, right? So nowadays, like, we have mammals that hold their eggs and babies inside their bodies, so they don't have to worry about this, right? But when you lay eggs, you should watch your nest, right? What happens if the boobies didn't watch their nest? The crabs would go eat their babies, right? So these turtles leave their eggs on the beach, and what happens when they leave their eggs on the beach? Well, we will see what happens when they lay their eggs on the beach. Okay, so Joe Brian, can you turn off the lights for me? Thanks.
This is the night they've all chosen to return. Dawn ends. "50 days later. Hundreds of thousands of 2-inch long turtles soldier their way to the surface. For this newborn and his band of brothers, it will be their longest day. Only 5 out of 100 will make it through the next 8 hours. Beyond the barricades of driftwood, open battlefield, 120 feet of deep sand. The enemy forces are waiting. So close. Yet so far. Last on the safety of the sand.
All right, Joe Brian, can you turn on the lights, please? Just the middle one. Just the middle. Okay, so you guys saw like what happened, right? First of all, like just the trek back to the ocean is really dangerous for them. There's all these predators waiting for them, and the video was a little bit misleading. Okay, just because they made it back to the water doesn't mean they're safe. Those waves could drown them easily. They breathe air still, right? And there's fish there, big fish, and they're gonna eat the turtle as well, right? Keep in mind also, if you heard in the very beginning, predators had 50 days to dig up those nests. A lot of them probably got discovered. I know that when people go to the islands where sea turtles are found, they follow the turtles and they dig up the nest, right? And sea turtles are all endangered. All sea turtles are endangered because of this, right? But in a sense, it's kind of their fault, right? Sea turtles it's their fault because their reproductive strategy has not kept up with the times of evolution, right? So if they do go extinct, then there's nothing we can do. Like that's just you shouldn't really be laying eggs on land if you're a marine organism, right? If you want to be a turtle, then stay on land, right? So that's what's going on with the sea turtles, right? Okay, so all those animals greedily picking up those sea turtles, and you wonder why the scientists are not helping them, right? Well, here's the thing. Those animals actually traveled from far and wide waiting for this. They may have starved just to wait for this day. And by taking away their food source, those birds and lizards might be in danger, right? So keep in mind that everything is supposed to be balanced, right? They were supposed to get eaten. They were waiting for this day. If not, they may have starved, right? So that's why we cannot tamper with that, right? By protecting sea turtles, we endanger the predators of their own starvation. Okay? All right, so, okay. Finally, the last thing we're going to talk about is all those sea turtles have a very poor reproductive strategy. Some sea snakes have figured out the right way to do this, and instead of laying eggs on land, which half of them still do, a few of them have learned how to give birth underwater, live birth, right? No eggs, skip the eggs. Just give birth to the live offspring, and then you'll see that this strategy is going to become more popular later with the next few classes, right? Right now, only a few sea snakes have figured this out. So it's kind of like the lungfish that can breathe air, but not all fish can breathe air, right? Only that one has figured it out. Okay, so here's just some examples of marine reptiles, right? We have not very many because, like I said, reptiles are terrestrial. They're not really supposed to be marine. And the marine representatives, we have sea snakes, saltwater crocodiles, sea turtles, marine iguanas. Not that many, but it's cool. We have like one of every representative, right? This is all the different types of reptiles there are: turtles, snakes, lizards, and crocodilians, right, nowadays. And then in the past, we had marine reptiles like this, right? Dinosaurs that lived in the ocean. Here are the main three, right? Ichthyosaurus, plesiosaurus, and mosasaurus. Saurus means lizard, and maybe you guys can figure out this one. Right? Ichthyo. What does that mean again? Fish, right? Because it looks kind of like a fish. Okay? So that's as far as we're going to get today. This is as far as the midterm is going to cover. And this is end of the discussion on class Reptilia, right? So starting back next week, we're going to be talking about the rest of Chordata. We have one more Chordata lecture to go over. But up until this point is where tomorrow's test is going to come. Okay, so we're going to do a test tomorrow. And probably that's going to be mostly it. We'll do a review before the test too. All right? And hopefully you guys will be right?
We get a Scantron, right?
Oh yeah. So preparation for the test, make sure you have a Scantron and a couple sheets of paper. The Scantron needs to be 100 questions total, 50 on each side, 882. Any other questions?